When returning home to surprise his mother on her birthday, a businessman catches his fiancée cruelly mistreating the woman who raised him with sacrifice. The perfect facade collapses, revealing a past of abuse and a dark connection between two families. Now, he must act with courage to defend his honor, even if it costs him everything he's built. The late afternoon sun gilded the mirrored glass of the skyscrapers in Seacrest Bay. The sea shimmered, as if thousands of diamonds were floating on the gentle waves that bathed the shore. On the 23rd floor of the Mirage building, one of the most exclusive condominiums on the Central Beach, Robert Miller watched the city from the panoramic window of his office. At 38, he was the president of Miller Construction, one of the most respected construction companies in Cornwall. Robert checked his watch and smiled. It was only 4 in the afternoon and he had already finished all of the day's tasks. He picked up his phone and turned off the notifications. Today was a special day, the 68th birthday of his mother, Mrs. Clara. At an elegant florist near his office, he personally chose an arrangement of purple orchids, her favorite. "For immediate delivery?" the attendant asked. "No, I'll take it with me. I want to surprise her," Robert replied with a smile. The businessman's driver was surprised when he was dismissed for the afternoon. Robert wanted to do everything differently. He took his own car, an imported sedan he rarely drove, and headed along Ocean Drive towards the mansion where he lived with his mother and his fiancée, Beatrice Vance. Beatrice, 32, was what many would call the complete package. A renowned architect, her face had graced the covers of local architecture and design magazines, and she possessed a sharp intellect and a striking presence at social events. The couple, who had met 2 years ago during the construction company's expansion project, were set to be married in 3 months, in a ceremony that promised to be the event of the year in Cornwall's high society. Parking discreetly in front of the mansion, Robert decided to enter, through the side garden door with the keys he always carried. He wanted to surprise his mother, perhaps catch her having tea on the veranda, as she often did on Thursday afternoons. He walked among the palm trees in the extensive garden, bouquet in hand and heartlight. Mrs. Clara Miller didn't fit the profile one would expect of a businessman's mother of that stature. She was a simple woman who still maintained the habits from when she lived in the Devon countryside. After her husband's passing, when Robert was just 12, she had dedicated herself to ensuring her son received a quality education, working as a seamstress in a clothing factory. Even after her son's success, who insisted she enjoy a life of comfort, Mrs. Clara remained discreet, preferring to help with household chores rather than hire more staff. The only extravagance she had accepted was Celia, the housekeeper who had been taking care of the house for 15 years and had become almost part of the family. As he approached the glass door leading to the living room, Robert heard raised voices. He froze, confused. He immediately recognized Beatrice's tone, but he had never heard her speak that way. He opened the door silently, and what he saw made his blood run cold. "Can't you do anything right? Look at this stain on my silk blouse. How many times do I have to explain that you're not to touch my things?" Beatrice was yelling, standing with her back to the door where Robert was. In front of her, sitting in an armchair with trembling hands, Mrs. Clara seemed diminished, shrunken like a frightened bird. "I'm sorry, my dear, I just wanted to help. When I saw the blouse on the bathroom floor, I thought—" "Don't think," Beatrice cut her off. "You can barely take care of yourself with that bad leg of yours, let alone my designer clothes." Beatrice took a deep breath, adjusting her posture, as if trying to control herself. "Do you know what irritates me the most? This habit of yours of meddling in my affairs, always with that saintly little face. No wonder your son is so controlling. He learned from the master." Mrs. Clara stood up with difficulty, leaning on her cane. "Beatrice, it was never my intention." With a sharp movement, Beatrice lightly pushed the elderly woman's arm, causing the cane to slip and fall. Mrs. Clara lost her balance, nearly falling to the floor, but was caught at the last moment by Celia, who rushed into the room. "Mrs. Vance!" the housekeeper exclaimed, supporting the elderly woman. "Please!" "Stay out of this, Celia," Beatrice replied dryly. "You should have taught your little friend that a mother-in-law's place is in her corner. Quiet." It was at that moment that Robert let the orchids fall to the floor. The sound made the 3 women turn towards him. Beatrice's face transformed instantly. The cruel expression gave way to one of surprise, which quickly turned into an affectionate smile. "Darling, what a wonderful surprise." Her voice was now melodic and sweet. "We were just preparing a—" "Enough, Beatrice." Robert's voice was low, but charged with a contained fury that silenced the room. "I saw everything." Beatrice turned pale. Her green eyes, usually so confident, now darted around the room as if searching for an emergency exit. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I heard every word." Robert walked towards his mother, helping her up by the arm and picking up her cane. "Mum, are you all right? How long has this been going on?" Mrs. Clara, with tear-filled eyes, couldn't look at her son. Celia, however, stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, this has been happening for months. Your mother asked me not to tell you. She didn't want to ruin your happiness." "This is absurd!" Beatrice exclaimed, regaining her composure. "This maid is making up stories, and your mother, poor thing, is already confused with age." "Confused?" Robert turned to Beatrice with a look that made her step back. "My mother has more clarity in her little finger than you have in your whole deceitful body." Beatrice changed her strategy. Her eyes filled with tears and her voice broke. "Darling, you don't understand. The pressure of the wedding, the demands of the company, sometimes I lose control, but I would never intentionally harm your mother." "Don't call me darling," Robert cut in, implacable. "What I saw wasn't a momentary loss of control, it was cruelty, coldness, and worse, I heard you speaking as if this were routine." He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I want you out of this house, now." "You can't be serious. We're getting married in 3 months." "No, we're not." Robert gently squeezed his mother's hand. "The wedding is off." "You'll regret this, Robert. No one ends things with me like this." Beatrice's eyes, previously tearful, now flashed with anger. "You don't know what I'm capable of." "It's precisely because I'm starting to find out what you're capable of that I'm ending everything. Now get out of my house before I forget the good manners my mother taught me." Beatrice looked at the three of them like a cornered animal. Finally, she grabbed her handbag and walked towards the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "This isn't over." When the door slammed shut, a heavy silence filled the room. Mrs. Clara collapsed into her son's arms, sobbing. "Forgive me, my son. I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want to end your happiness." Robert hugged his mother tightly, feeling a mixture of anger, guilt, and pain that he could barely process. How had he not noticed before? How had he been so blind? "The only thing you need to forgive me for is for bringing that viper into our home," he whispered, kissing his mother's forehead. But that's over. What Robert didn't know was that this scene in the elegant seaside apartment was just the beginning of a storm that would threaten not only his heart, but everything he had built. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The next morning brought a grey winter sky over Seacrest Bay, as if nature were mirroring the mood inside the Miller mansion. Robert hadn't been able to sleep. He had spent the night reflecting on the past 2 years, trying to identify signs that might have foreshadowed the revelation of Beatrice's true nature. Small details, previously ignored, now fit together like pieces of a dark puzzle. When he went down to the kitchen, he found Celia preparing a hearty breakfast. The housekeeper had always been a silent pillar of the family, but now Robert realized her role had been much greater than he had imagined. "Celia, how long exactly has this been happening?" Robert asked, sitting at the table. The grey-haired woman sighed before answering. "It started with small things, right after she moved in. Mean comments, looks of contempt when you weren't around. Mrs. Clara pretended not to notice, said it was my imagination." Celia poured the coffee. "Then, about 4 months ago, I caught Mrs. Vance screaming at your mother because she had moved some decorations in the living room. From then on, it got worse. And my mother never wanted to tell me. She said you were so happy, so fulfilled, that she didn't want to spoil it." Celia sat opposite him, breaking her discreet employee protocol for the first time in 15 years. "Yesterday wasn't the first time Mrs. Vance knocked over your mother's cane. It happened in the garden last week. Fortunately, I was nearby." Robert covered his face with his hands. "How could I have been so blind?" "She was very skilled, sir. In front of you she was the perfect fiancée. She treated Mrs. Clara like a queen." Robert's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Paul Morris, his best friend and the company's financial director. "Have you seen the Valley News portal today?" Paul asked without any pleasantries. "No, why?" "I think you'd better take a look and brace yourself." Robert hung up and immediately accessed the region's most popular news site. The headline hit him like a punch. "Businessman cancels $2 million wedding on the eve of the ceremony. Sources close to the couple point to an extramarital affair." "My God," Robert murmured, quickly reading the article that insinuated he had cheated on Beatrice and used his mother as an excuse to break off the relationship. He barely had time to process the information when his phone exploded with notifications. Company executives, close friends, and even important clients wanted to know what was happening. In the Miller Construction Directors group chat, messages of concern were piling up. Mrs. Clara appeared in the kitchen, walking slowly with her cane. Her face still showed traces of the previous night's tears. "Son, is everything all right?" she asked, noticing Robert's troubled expression. He tried to smile, hiding his phone. "Everything's fine, Mum. Just company business." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Celia went to answer and returned accompanied by Paul. Robert's longtime friend wore a grave expression. "Things are getting worse," Paul said after greeting Mrs. Clara warmly. "Beatrice just gave an interview to Valley TV, claiming to have been discarded like an object after years dedicated to you and your family." "Years? We've only known each other for 2 years," Robert exclaimed, incredulous. "And there's more. She insinuated that you had been psychologically abusive, controlling her professional contacts and even her clothes." Mrs. Clara let out a small gasp of indignation. "How can she lie like that? My son always treated her like a princess." "That's exactly why I'm here," Paul continued. "The board wants an emergency meeting at 2 p.m. They're worried about the impact on the company's image. The launch of the Emerald Coast residence is next week, and investors are already calling." Robert nodded, trying to organize his thoughts. "I'll be there. We need a strategy to contain this situation." After Paul left, Robert hugged his mother, who looked devastated. "This is all my fault," Mrs. Clara lamented. "If I had told you sooner—" "No, Mum. The fault is entirely mine for not realizing the kind of person I was bringing into our family. But I'll fix this, I promise." The rest of the morning was a whirlwind. The family lawyer was called urgently, and an official statement was prepared denying Beatrice's accusations. Robert instructed his communications team not to go into detail about the real reason for the breakup, wanting to protect his mother's privacy. As he prepared for the board meeting, Robert's phone rang. Again, unknown number. "Mr. Miller?" A female voice sounded on the other end. "My name is Judith Sanders. I worked as a maid at the Vance family home for 15 years, until I was fired by Mrs. Regina, Beatrice's mother, 2 months ago." Robert sat down, suddenly interested. "How did you get my number?" "A friend of mine works as a cleaner in your office. I'm sorry to intrude, but when I saw what's happening in the news, well, I thought you needed to know some things about your ex-fiancé." "What kind of things?" "I'd rather not talk over the phone. Can we meet?" Robert hesitated, suspicious. It could be a trap set by Beatrice. "I know you must be wary," Judith continued, as if reading his thoughts. "But I have proof of what I'm going to say. And believe me, it's not in Mrs. Vance's interest for me to talk to you." After a few seconds of reflection, Robert agreed to meet her at a discreet cafe near the city centre before the board meeting. The Hillside Cafe was a modest establishment, frequented mainly by local workers, a place where a businessman like Robert would rarely be seen. He found Judith sitting at the back, a woman of about 60, with a tired expression and watchful eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Miller," she said as Robert sat down. "What I have to tell you isn't pleasant." "I'm listening." "I worked for the Vance family since Beatrice was a teenager. I saw a lot in that house." Judith paused as if organizing her memories. "Mrs. Regina, her mother, has suffered from chronic depression for years. The father abandoned the family when Beatrice was 16, and the girl never got over it. She developed a resentment against older women, especially when they are frail or dependent. Robert frowned. What do you mean exactly? Beatrice mistreated her own mother, Mr. Miller. At first it was just harsh words, then came the humiliations. In recent years, when Mrs. Regina had a relapse of her depression and became more dependent, the situation worsened. Why did no one ever report this? The Vance family has a lot of power in this region. Beatrice's grandfather was one of the biggest contractors in the South in the 80s and 90s. And Mrs. Regina, well, she blames herself for her daughter's behavior. She believes she failed as a mother. Judith opened her bag and took out an envelope. I was fired because I caught Beatrice pushing her mother during an argument. Mrs. Regina fell and injured her arm. When I threatened to tell the family doctor, I was fired the next day, accused of theft. She slid the envelope across the table. Inside, Robert found photos of a middle-aged woman with bruises on her arm, along with a handwritten letter where Judith detailed other incidents. Why are you showing me this now? Because I saw what's happening in the news. I know Beatrice, Mr. Miller. She won't stop. And I'm afraid of what she might do to you or your mother. Beatrice has always been obsessed with control and revenge. She doesn't accept losing. Robert put the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket, feeling the weight of the situation increase on his shoulders. Thank you for your courage, Mrs. Sanders. I will take the necessary measures. As he left the cafe, Robert noticed he was being followed. A man with a professional camera was trying to be inconspicuous a few meters behind him. The press was already on his tail, and that meeting with Judith would certainly fuel more speculation. The clock read 1:30 p.m. when he arrived at the Miller construction building. His mind was working rapidly, processing the new information and trying to devise a plan of action. One thing was clear: the situation was much more serious than he had initially imagined. In the lift, on his way to the boardroom, he received a message from Paul. Be careful. A proposal just came in from Vaughn Enterprises to buy 20% of our shares. The timing doesn't seem like a coincidence. Robert took a deep breath. The storm was just beginning. The boardroom at Miller Construction exuded discreet luxury. Dark wood on the walls, an imposing oval table, and through the large window, a privileged view of the Seacrest Bay shoreline. Normally, Robert felt a sense of pride upon entering this space he had helped build. Today, however, he faced the apprehensive gazes of the 7 board members, men and women who had followed his career for years. We need to discuss the elephant in the room, began Stephen Brooks, the oldest board member, a 70-year-old man who had known Robert's father. The company's shares dropped 3% this morning alone. Investors are nervous about all this negative exposure. Robert nodded, maintaining a firm posture. I understand everyone's concern, but I want to make it clear that Beatrice's accusations are completely unfounded. We know that, Robert, intervened Christine Evans, the only woman on the board. We've known you long enough not to doubt your character, but unfortunately, public perception is what matters most right now. The launch of the Emerald Coast residence represents a $500 million investment. We can't take any risks. What are you suggesting exactly? Robert asked, already sensing where the conversation was headed. Robert Marshall, the financial director, cleared his throat before answering. We think it would be prudent for you to step down temporarily from the presidency, just until this storm passes. Robert felt his blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. I understand. And who would take my place? Paul Morris could be the interim president, Stephen suggested. He knows the operation well and has the investors' trust. With all due respect, Robert adjusted himself in his chair, looking each board member in the eye. That would be exactly what Beatrice and whoever else is behind this wants. Showing weakness now would be a strategic mistake. Behind this? Questioned Marshall. Are you suggesting there's more to this than a scorned fiancé seeking revenge? Robert hesitated, deciding how much to reveal. This morning, I received a proposal from Vaughn Enterprises to purchase 20% of our shares. The timing seems at the very least suspicious. A murmur went around the table. Vaughn was their biggest competitor in the region, known for aggressive market tactics. Furthermore, Robert continued, I have information that Beatrice is not who we all thought she was. There's a pattern of behavior that... "Sorry I'm late," interrupted Paul, rushing into the room. His usually calm face showed signs of worry. "I just received an important call. We need to turn on the TV." Without waiting for permission, Paul turned on the large screen in the room. The image showed the studio of Valley News, the region's highest-rated program. Beatrice Vance, impeccably dressed and made up, was giving an exclusive interview. "It was then that I realized I was in a controlling relationship," she was saying, her eyes welling up. "Robert wanted me to be perfect in everything. He criticized my clothes, monitored my professional contacts, and worse, used his mother as an excuse to manipulate me." The presenter, Marcia Campbell, displayed a look of studied solidarity. "And what was your relationship with his mother like?" "I loved her as if she were my own mother," Beatrice replied, letting a strategic tear escape, perfectly ruining her eyeliner. "I did everything for her, but Robert used any kindness from me as a way to control me. My mother would like you to wear this dress. My mother prefers you not to work late." It was suffocating. Robert felt his stomach turn at the grotesque inversion of reality. The boardroom fell into a heavy silence as they watched, mesmerized, this Oscar-worthy performance. "And what was the final straw?" the presenter asked. "I discovered—" Beatrice paused dramatically. "I discovered compromising messages on his phone." Another woman. "When I confronted Robert, he invented a story that he caught me mistreating his mother, something absurd and completely false." Paul turned off the TV, unable to watch anymore. "This is ridiculous. She's completely distorting reality." "It's her word against yours, Robert," Christine pondered. "And unfortunately, she's doing a convincing job for the public." "I have proof of Beatrice's true character," Robert stated, mentioning his meeting with Judith and the photos he had received. "I can expose all of this." "And start an even bigger public war?" questioned Stephen. "Attacking the image of a woman who presents herself as a victim would be disastrous for the company." The discussion continued for another hour, with strategies being proposed and discarded. In the end, it was decided that Robert would remain as president, but the company would issue a neutral official statement, simply denying the accusations without going into detail or counterattacking. As he left the meeting, Robert was intercepted by Camilla Rivers, the new journalist in the company's press office. "Mr. Miller, can we speak in private?" she asked with a serious expression that didn't match her early 30s and youthful appearance. In Robert's office, Camilla got straight to the point. "Before working here, I was an investigative reporter for the Cornwall Chronicle for 5 years. I still have some contacts." She hesitated. "A source informed me that Beatrice has been secretly meeting with Edward Vaughan for the past few weeks." "The owner of Vaughan Enterprises?" Robert frowned. "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely. I even have photos of the two of them leaving a restaurant in St. Ives 3 days ago." Camilla showed the images on her tablet. "And there's more. My source claims they were discussing information about the bidding for the Braveheart Cove Resort Complex." Robert felt a chill. The bidding for the resort complex was the largest real estate project in the region's history, valued at over $900 million. Miller Construction was the favorite to win, but the final decision would be made in just 2 weeks. "Beatrice had access to privileged information about our proposal," Robert murmured, connecting the dots. "We were working on this project together." "Exactly. And now she might be selling that information to your direct competitor." Camilla adjusted her colorful framed glasses. "Mr. Miller, this goes far beyond a romantic drama. It looks like a coordinated strategy to bring down both your personal reputation and the company's, weakening it for a possible hostile takeover." Robert leaned back in his chair, processing the information. His phone rang. It was Celia. "Sir, sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Vance's mother is here, Mrs. Regina Vance. She insists on speaking with Mrs. Clara." "Is my mother alone with her?" "Yes, they're in the living room. Mrs. Vance seemed very distraught, almost begging to come in." Mrs. Clara allowed it. "I'm on my way." During the drive to his house, Robert tried to imagine what Regina Vance could want with his mother. Was it another part of Beatrice's plan? An attempt at intimidation? When he arrived, he found a surprising scene. His mother and Regina Vance were sitting side by side on the sofa, their hands clasped together. Both had red eyes from crying. "Son," Mrs. Clara said upon seeing him, "Regina came to tell us something very serious." Regina Vance was a frail-looking woman, her face bearing the marks of past suffering. Her prematurely white hair and stooped posture made her look much older than her 63 years. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice trembling, "I came to ask for forgiveness for what my daughter is doing to you and your family." "Mrs. Vance, please let me finish. I raised Beatrice alone since my husband left us. I always tried to give her the best, but I failed in many ways." Regina wiped away a tear. "My daughter developed a difficult behavior, especially with me. For years I believed it was my fault, that I deserved the treatment she gave me." Robert looked at his mother, who nodded sadly. "But what I really came to tell you," Regina continued, "is something much more serious, something I only recently discovered." She took a deep breath. "About a month ago, Beatrice hired a private investigator to research your family." "An investigator?" Robert sat down, sensing that what was coming next would change everything. "Yes, she was obsessed with finding some secret, something she could use if your relationship didn't go as she planned." Regina looked at Mrs. Clara as if asking for permission. What the investigator discovered was something even I didn't know. Something about our past, about our fathers. Mrs. Clara squeezed Regina's hand, giving her strength to continue. "My father, August Vance, and Robert's father, Francis Miller, knew each other," Regina revealed, her voice choked with emotion. "They didn't just know each other, they were partners in a construction business in Devon back in the 70s. Robert felt his heart race. His father had died when he was 12 after a tragic car accident, or at least that's what he had always been told. "The accident that killed your father, it wasn't an accident." Regina could barely speak. "There was an argument between them. My father was driving. He had embezzled money from the company and your father found out." A heavy silence filled the room as the revelation hung like a dark cloud. Robert looked at his mother, stunned. "Mum, did you know about this?" Mrs. Clara nodded slowly. "Only that it wasn't an ordinary accident. The police investigated, but August Vance was an influential man. The case was closed as a traffic tragedy. I was a young woman alone, with a small child to raise. I had no way to fight his power." "And Beatrice found out all of this," Robert concluded finally, understanding the magnitude of what he was facing. "Is that why she got close to me from the beginning? Was it all a planned revenge?" "I don't believe it was like that at first," Regina replied. "I think she genuinely fell in love with you. But when she discovered the connection between our families..." She hesitated. "Beatrice always had this obsession with control and power. I think she saw it as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" Robert questioned, though he already feared the answer. "For what she always wanted. Revenge for being abandoned, power over others, and now to destroy the family she believes destroyed hers." Regina lowered her eyes. "I came to warn you because I fear what my daughter might do. She has no limits when she feels betrayed." Robert looked at his mother, then at Regina, and finally out the window, where the sun was beginning to set over the sea. The idyllic scene contrasted with the storm brewing inside him. "How am I going to face this?" he murmured, more to himself than to the two women. Mrs. Clara stood up with difficulty, leaning on her cane, and walked over to her son. She placed a hand on his face with that tenderness only mothers possess. "The same way we face everything in life, my son, together, with truth and dignity." Robert hugged his mother, feeling a determination grow within him. There was much more at stake than his reputation or even his company. It was his family history, his integrity, and his father's legacy that needed to be protected. "Regina," he said finally, "thank you for your courage. I know it couldn't have been easy to come here." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "It's the least I can do after all these years." At that moment, Robert's phone buzzed. It was a message from Camilla. "Got more info? Beatrice has a meeting with Vaughan tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Marina Hotel. I believe they'll discuss the bid. We need to act fast." Robert took a deep breath. It was time to make a plan. The Marina Hotel was one of the most traditional establishments in Seacrest Bay. Its discreet facade by the canal hid sophisticated interiors frequented by the region's business elite. That morning, Robert waited in a dark van parked across the street, accompanied by Camilla and an audio technician. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mr. Miller?" asked Camilla, adjusting the recording equipment. "If we get caught, we could face legal trouble." "We're not trespassing or recording inside the hotel," Robert replied, not taking his eyes off the entrance. "We're just in a public space recording a conversation in a common area. Our lawyer has already confirmed this is legal." "Still, it's risky," pondered the technician, a young man in his 20s who seemed too nervous for the job he was doing. Robert understood the risks. Under normal circumstances, he would never resort to such tactics. But after the previous day's revelations, he understood that he wasn't just facing a vengeful ex-fiancée. He was up against a meticulously orchestrated conspiracy to destroy not only his reputation, but his entire company and his father's legacy. At 9:55 a.m., a white BMW pulled up in front of the hotel. Beatrice got out, stunning in a red suit that was sure to turn heads. Even after everything, Robert couldn't help but notice how perfectly she manipulated her public image. The choice of outfit for a woman who claimed to be emotionally distraught was calculatedly bold. 10 minutes later, Edward Vaughan arrived, the owner of the rival construction company. A middle-aged man with grey hair at his temples and an athletic build that defied his 45 years, Edward was known in the market for his business aggression and lack of scruples. "They're here," Robert murmured. "Let's see if they follow the pattern of previous meetings." As predicted, after half an hour inside the hotel, Beatrice and Edward came out together to the outdoor area near the marina. It was a habit of Edward's, according to Camilla's informants. He preferred to discuss sensitive matters outdoors where he believed he was safe from eavesdropping. The technician adjusted the directional equipment, capable of picking up conversations from over 50 meters away. Robert and Camilla put on their headphones. The voices were clear enough. "I managed to get access to Miller's entire proposal," Beatrice was saying, walking calmly beside Edward. "I know exactly how much they're offering and how they've structured the project." "Impressive," Edward replied. "And what about the sustainability clause? We heard rumors they had something innovative planned. A rainwater harvesting system integrated with solar power. It reduces the complex's energy consumption by 40%. It's the differential that could give them the edge in the technical scoring." Edward smiled. "Then we'll include something similar in our proposal with a 45% reduction. It's hard to verify those numbers before implementation." Robert clenched his fists under the table. He was witnessing blatant corporate espionage. "And what about the social aspect of the project?" Edward asked. "I know the mayor is very interested in that." Miller included a professional training program for residents of the Hawks Hill community. They promised to employ at least 30% local labor during construction. "We can offer 35% and add a permanent technical school after completion." Beatrice smiled, stopping to look at the anchored boats. "And what about me? Have you decided on my proposal? A position as Director of Special Projects at Vaughan, with a share in the profits from this specific venture." Edward adjusted the knot of his tie. "But that only happens once we win the bid, and we need to ensure Robert Miller is completely discredited by then." "That's being taken care of," Beatrice replied coldly. "Yesterday's interview was just the beginning. Next week, an anonymous source will reveal alleged cases of harassment within his company. I already have 2 ex-employees willing to give statements in exchange for financial compensation." "Excellent. That should scare off the international investors he's been courting for the Emerald Coast residence." "There's something else you need to know," Beatrice said, lowering her voice. "Something I found out about his father." Robert's heart pounded. How far would she go? Apparently, Robert's father was involved in some shady dealings before his accident. Beatrice paused dramatically. "I have documents that suggest money laundering. If that comes out now with all the other accusations, it would be the final blow," Edward completed. "Miller would collapse, and we could acquire the assets for a fraction of their value." "Brilliant, Beatrice. You've thought of everything." "I always think of everything." The two continued walking, discussing more technical details of the bid. Camilla looked at Robert, who remained silent, his face a mask of restraint. "Mr. Miller, this is much worse than we imagined," she whispered. "It's also exactly what we needed," he replied, removing his headphones. "We have enough proof now. Turn off the equipment." Back at the Miller construction office, Robert gathered a small group of trusted individuals. Paul Morris, Camilla, the company's lawyer, Dr. Thompson, and surprisingly, Regina Vance, who had agreed to cooperate. "What we have is explosive," commented Dr. Thompson after listening to the recording. "Corporate espionage, conspiracy, defamation, false accusations. We have grounds for criminal and civil lawsuits." "But I don't just want to sue," Robert replied, pacing the meeting room. "That would drag on for years in court, and in the meantime, the damage would already be done. We need a more immediate strategy." "We could leak it to the press," Camilla suggested. "I have contacts who would publish the full story." "And we'd be stooping to their level," Paul pondered. "Besides, Beatrice has skillfully positioned herself as a victim. Even with this evidence, some of the public will side with her." Regina, who had remained silent until then, spoke in a low but firm voice. "There's something you need to know about the accusations against Robert's father." Everyone turned to her. "They are completely false. August Vance, my father, forged documents to incriminate Francis Miller after his death. It was his way of protecting himself in case anyone investigated the accident more closely." "How do you know that?" Robert asked, surprised. "I found the original documents and the forged versions in my father's safe after he died, 10 years ago. I never had the courage to do anything with them out of shame and fear, but I have them, and I can make them available." A heavy silence fell over the room. For Robert, that revelation meant more than a weapon against Beatrice. It was the redemption of his father's memory. "Thank you, Regina," he said with sincere emotion. "This means a great deal to my family." "It's the least I can do after so many years of silence." Robert took a deep breath, returning to the immediate problem. "We need a three-pronged strategy: legal, media, and business." In the following days, a complex plan was meticulously structured. On the legal front, Miller Construction's lawyers prepared lawsuits against Beatrice and Edward Vaughan without filing them yet. On the media front, Camilla coordinated a communication strategy that would humanize Robert and his mother without turning them into victims. The most surprising part of the plan came from Robert himself. He brought forward the launch of a social project he had been developing quietly: the revitalization of the neighborhood where he grew up with his mother in Port Isaac, a nearby town. The Roots project included renovating a public school, creating a vocational training center, and building social housing with sustainable technology. "This isn't just marketing," Robert explained to Paul, who had questioned the investment of the family's own funds, not the company's. "It's about reconnecting with my origins, about honoring what my mother did for me and giving back to the community." The final piece of the plan surprised everyone. Mrs. Clara, always averse to public exposure, agreed to give an interview to Good Morning Cornwall, the most watched program in the county. The elderly woman, physically frail but with an unshakable spirit, carefully prepared for her moment in front of the cameras. On the morning of the interview, Robert accompanied his mother to the studio, feeling a mix of pride and concern. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mum? You don't have to expose yourself." Mrs. Clara smiled, squeezing her son's hand. "I spent years in silence, son. I let fear silence me when your father left us, and again when that young woman started mistreating me. It's time to use my voice." The interview was conducted by Louise Price, a respected journalist known for her empathy and professionalism. Mrs. Clara spoke with simplicity and honesty about her life, the difficult years after being widowed, the sacrifices to raise her son alone, and finally, with impressive dignity, the mistreatment she had suffered from Beatrice. "I never told my son because I didn't want to interfere with his happiness," she explained, her eyes moist but her voice firm. "I thought it was just me, that maybe I had done something to displease her. Often we older people believe we are a burden." "And how do you feel now, with all this exposed publicly?" Louise asked. Mrs. Clara looked directly at the camera. "I feel at peace. The truth sets you free even when it hurts. And I want to say to other people, especially the elderly who suffer in silence, you do not deserve any kind of disrespect. Our age does not diminish our value. And what about your son's ex-fiancée? Is there any resentment? Mrs. Clara's answer surprised even Robert, who was watching from the wings. I feel sorry for her. Someone who hurts others like that carries deep wounds inside. I hope she finds peace and help to heal whatever makes her act that way. When the interview ended, the entire studio was emotional. Staff, camera operators, producers. Everyone came over to greet the simple elderly woman who had spoken with such wisdom and compassion. On the way home, Robert received dozens of messages. The interview was going viral on social media, with emotional comments from people all over the country. Hashtags like Basis Warrior Clara and Respect the Elderly became trending topics. You broke the internet, Mum, Robert joked, showing her the numbers. Mrs. Clara smiled, looking out the window at the Seacrest Bay Sea. I just spoke from the heart, son. People recognize the truth when they hear it. Robert's phone rang. It was Paul with urgent news. You need to see this. Vaughan Enterprises has just issued a statement disassociating themselves from any relationship with Beatrice Vance. They are denying she has any official connection with the company. Looks like someone is abandoning a sinking ship, Robert commented. That's not all. I just got a call from Edward Vaughan. He wants to meet with you. Urgently. Robert looked at his mother, who nodded gently, as if she understood exactly what was happening. Tell him I'll be available tomorrow in my office at 9 a.m. Are you sure? Wouldn't a neutral location be better? No, Robert replied firmly. I want to receive him on my own territory. The time for retreating is over. The following evening, Robert was having dinner with his mother on the mansion's veranda when he received a notification. Beatrice had posted a video on her social media. Reluctantly, he clicked to watch. The woman who appeared on the screen was unrecognizable. Without makeup, her eyes swollen from crying, Beatrice looked as if she had aged years in just a few days. I want to make a public retraction, she began, her voice hoarse. Everything I said about Robert Miller was driven by anger and desperation. He never mistreated or controlled me. On the contrary, he always treated me with respect and kindness. She paused, visibly uncomfortable. I apologized to him, to Mrs. Clara, and to everyone I hurt with my lies. I am seeking psychological help and hope to one day be able to repair the harm I've caused. The video ended there abruptly. Robert turned off his phone, unable to formulate an immediate reaction. Did she seem sincere? Asked Mrs. Clara, who had watched with him. I don't know, he answered honestly. But sincere or not, this changes everything. For tomorrow's meeting. The final piece of the puzzle was falling into place. And for the first time in weeks, Robert allowed himself a moment of hope. Robert's office at Miller Construction reflected his personality, elegant without being ostentatious, functional without being cold. That morning he arrived an hour before his scheduled meeting with Edward Vaughan. He wanted to organize not only the documents, but also his thoughts. The previous night, after Beatrice's surprising video, he had spoken at length with his legal team. Dr. Thompson had warned that the public retraction didn't close the case. There was still evidence of corporate espionage and attempted sabotage that could not be ignored. We need to be strategic, the lawyer had advised. We can use this as a bargaining chip, depending on Vaughan's posture tomorrow. Paul arrived at 8:30 a.m., bringing the latest market news. The company's shares have fully recovered after your mother's interview. In fact, we're 2% above the pre-crisis value. He smiled, adjusting his thin-framed glasses. It seems investing in the Roots project was a masterstroke. The business press is calling it a new paradigm of corporate social responsibility. Robert nodded, grateful for his friend and financial director's competence. And the Emerald Coast residents? All the pre-sale units have been reserved. The scandal ended up generating free publicity. At 9 a.m. sharp, the secretary announced Edward Vaughan's arrival. The rival entered the office alone, without his usual entourage of assistants. His usually confident face showed signs of sleepless nights. "Thank you for seeing me, Miller," he said, extending his hand. Robert shook it briefly, indicating the chair in front of him. What can I do for you, Vaughan? Edward cleared his throat, shifting in the chair like someone trying to find the least uncomfortable position in an inevitably awkward situation. I came personally to clear up the misunderstanding involving my company and Ms. Vance. He avoided direct eye contact. Any interaction she may have had with members of our team was without official authorization. We have already taken internal measures to ensure this doesn't happen again. Misunderstanding. Robert kept his tone neutral, observing his rival's growing discomfort. That's an interesting word to describe corporate espionage and conspiracy to manipulate a public tender. Edward turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. You don't? Robert opened a folder on his desk. I have here recordings and witness statements of your meetings with Beatrice Vance at the Marina Hotel. Detailed discussions about confidential information from my company, strategies to sabotage our reputation, and even plans to use forged documents against my father's memory. That's absurd. You can't prove— I can and I will if necessary. Robert slid an envelope across the desk. Here is a copy of what we will deliver to the proper authorities, the bidding committee for the resort complex, and the country's main media outlets if we don't reach an agreement now. Edward opened the envelope with trembling hands. His face lost even more color as he leafed through the documents, transcripts of the recordings, photos of the meetings, and signed statements from witnesses. What do you want? He finally asked, defeated. 3 things. Robert stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the Seacrest Bay skyline. First, Vaughan Enterprises will withdraw from the bidding for the Braveheart Cove Resort Complex. I'm not finished. Robert held up his hand, cutting off the protest. Second, you will sever any professional or personal ties with Beatrice Vance. No hiring, no consulting, nothing. Edward nodded in silence. Third, and most importantly, absolute silence on this situation. No insinuations, no leaks, no indirect attacks on my company or my family. The matter dies here. And in return? In return, these documents will never be made public. Your reputation and that of your company will remain intact. And perhaps most importantly for you, we avoid a criminal prosecution that could result in prison. Edward ran a hand through his grey hair, visibly shaken. You win, Miller. Do I have your word that this stays between us if I meet these conditions? You have my word, and unlike some, I honor it. After Edward left, Paul entered the room, eager for news. So? He accepted all the terms, Robert replied, feeling strangely empty. That victory, though necessary, didn't bring the satisfaction he had expected. That's excellent, Paul exclaimed. With Vaughan out of the picture, the bid is practically guaranteed, and with the Roots project attracting so much positive attention, the next few months will be spectacular for the company. Robert nodded distractedly. Paul, I need a personal favor. Can you handle things here today? I want to spend the afternoon with my mother. Of course, no problem. Is Mrs. Clara okay? Yes, she's fine. I just need to process all of this. At the seaside mansion, Robert found his mother in the garden, watching the ocean. He sat silently beside her on the wooden bench, and for a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Did you sort things out with that Vaughan fellow? Mrs. Clara finally asked. I did. He accepted all our terms. And how do you feel? Robert took a deep breath, looking at the horizon. Empty. I thought beating him would bring me some satisfaction, but I don't feel any of that. Mrs. Clara smiled wisely. That's because this victory doesn't heal what's really hurting you, son. And what would that be? Trust. The ability to believe in people. She took her son's hand in hers, wrinkled with time. You know, when your father left us, I went through that too. I questioned everything and everyone. For years, I built walls around my heart. And how did you get over it? By realizing that the walls that protect us also imprison us. She pointed to the ocean. It's like that horizon. It looks like the sea ends there, but we know it continues. There's so much more beyond what our eyes can see. Robert's phone vibrated. It was a message from Celia. A letter for you, ma'am, from Beatrice Vance. Minutes later, Robert handed the envelope to his mother. Are you sure you want to read this? I am. Everyone deserves to be heard, even when they've done wrong. The letter was handwritten on thin, perfumed paper. Dear Mrs. Clara, I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I do so nonetheless. What I did to you was unforgivable. There is no justification for the cruelty with which I treated you. For years I carried an anger that wasn't mine, a resentment for what my grandfather did to your husband, which I then transferred to my own father's abandonment. I turned older, vulnerable women into the target of my fury, repeating a sick cycle of abuse. I am starting therapy next week, not to clear my conscience, but because I have finally admitted that I need help. Your testimony on television touched me deeply. Your compassion for me, who only caused you pain, showed me the chasm of character that exists between us. I don't expect reconciliation now, perhaps never, but I needed you to know that your words planted a seed of transformation in me. With profound regret. Beatrice Vance. Mrs. Clara carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Her eyes were moist, but serene. Are you going to reply? Robert asked. I will. Not immediately, but I will. She looked at her son. Forgiveness isn't for the other person, son. It's for ourselves, so we don't carry the burden of hate. Do you believe she can really change? I believe everyone has that capacity. But true change takes time and requires brutal honesty with oneself. Mrs. Clara touched her son's face. You have a path of healing ahead of you too, my son. Don't let what happened harden your heart. Robert nodded, absorbing the wisdom of the woman who had always been his safe harbor. Suddenly, he felt a wave of admiration, so intense he could barely contain it. How do you do it? He asked, his voice choked with emotion. How do you maintain this kindness after everything you've been through? The loss of Dad, the years of hard work, and now this. Mrs. Clara smiled with that serene smile that lit up her wrinkled face. By choosing every day, choosing to see beyond the pain, beyond the horizon. That afternoon, mother and son talked as they hadn't in years. Mrs. Clara finally shared stories about Francis Miller that Robert had never heard. Not just the businessman who started the construction company, but the man who sang off-key serenades, who cried when his son was born, who never failed to bring flowers on the simplest of occasions. Your father wasn't perfect, Mrs. Clara concluded. No one is. But he was a man of integrity who loved his family deeply. That's what you need to hold on to, not the lies they tried to tarnish his memory with. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, Celia came to announce that dinner was served. But before they went inside, Robert made an unexpected proposal. Mum, I've been thinking, what do you think about us moving? We don't need a mansion this size with so many difficult memories. And where would we go? I was thinking of something simpler, maybe near the Roots project in Port Isaac, a place where we could really reconnect with our origins. Mrs. Clara squeezed her son's hand, her eyes shining. You know what I miss the most? Teaching. Before you were born, I was a primary school teacher. Maybe I could go back to doing something like that as a volunteer. That would be perfect. We could include an educational center in the project, named after you. Without my name, son. She laughed softly. I don't need plaques to feel useful. I just want to make a difference quietly, as I've always done. That night, Robert slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Not that all the problems were solved. There was still much to deal with, to process, to heal. But he felt he had rediscovered his internal compass, his true north. The next morning, upon entering his office at the construction company, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He promoted Camilla Rivers from press officer to director of communications and social projects. She would be the one to coordinate the expansion of the Roots project to other communities. Are you sure? Camilla asked, stunned by the promotion. I've been with the company for less than a year. I am. You've demonstrated not only competence but integrity and a commitment to values that go beyond immediate profit. That's exactly what we need for this new phase. The board of directors, which weeks before had questioned Robert's leadership, now applauded his initiatives. The scandal that had threatened to destroy his reputation had ended up being the catalyst for a reinvention that was not just personal but corporate. While reviewing the executive project for the resort complex, now practically guaranteed after Vaughan's withdrawal, Robert received a call from his mother. "Son, I've written a reply to Beatrice. I'd like you to read it before I send it." "Of course, Mum. I'll stop by at the end of the day." Putting the phone away, Robert looked out, the panoramic window of his office. The view of Seacrest Bay was still stunning. The sea, the gleaming buildings, the life pulsating below. But now he saw it with different eyes, no longer as symbols of success and power, but as part of a larger landscape, which included the simple countryside where he grew up, the hardships his mother had faced to raise him, the ordinary people who built that city with honest work. The legacy that truly mattered was not in the skyscrapers he had built, but in the values he had chosen to honor. And that was a building no one could tear down. 3 months had passed since the storm that nearly destroyed the personal and professional life of Robert Miller. Autumn was arriving gently on the Cornish coast, softening the heat and bringing new tones to the landscape. At the headquarters of Miller Construction, the atmosphere reflected this seasonal change, more serene, more focused, more authentic. The main meeting room had been redesigned. The old rectangular table was replaced by an oval one, eliminating the head chair where Robert used to sit. It was a small but significant symbol of the new corporate philosophy. Horizontal leadership, valuing different voices, more collaborative decisions. That Thursday morning, the team gathered for the final presentation of the Roots project, which would be officially inaugurated over the weekend. Camilla Rivers, now Director of Social Projects, conducted the presentation with the same determined energy she had shown during the crisis. "The community center works were completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule," she explained, showing photos of the spacious building with sustainable architecture. "The educational center already has 300 people enrolled for the technical courses starting next month, and the waiting list keeps growing." Paul Morris, always attentive to the numbers, added, "The initial investment was 15% over budget, but the impact on brand value has exceeded all expectations. The latest survey showed a 23% increase in public trust in the company." Robert watched the team with genuine pride. The crisis they had faced together had forged deeper bonds than mere professional relationships. "And what about Mrs. Clara's involvement?" asked Christine Evans, the board member who months ago had questioned Robert's ability to lead during the crisis. Camilla smiled. "She surprised us all. She started by offering just one weekly craft class for the neighborhood kids, but now she coordinates a complete intergenerational program. The community's elderly teach traditional skills to the children, while the young people offer computer and social media classes for the older generation." "My mother has always been an educator at heart," Robert commented with evident admiration. "She just rediscovered her calling." The meeting continued with the final adjustments for the inauguration ceremony. When everyone had left, Paul remained in the room with Robert. "We have news from Vaughan Enterprises," he reported with a neutral expression. "They're undergoing a complete restructuring. Edward Vaughan has stepped down from the presidency, citing personal reasons. The board is implementing a new code of ethics and governance. It's interesting how consequences catch up with us, even when we don't seek them directly," Robert reflected. "Are they upholding our agreement?" "Religiously. No mention of the case, no indirect attacks. And as expected, they've completely cleared the way for us in the resort complex bid." Robert nodded, satisfied not out of revenge, but for the natural order that seemed to be re-establishing itself. "And what about your personal life?" Paul asked, changing the subject. "It's been 3 months since, well, have you thought about starting over?" "One day at a time," Robert replied with a serene smile. "Dr. Taylor has been helping me a lot." The decision to start therapy had been an important step. Robert understood that while he had handled the practical aspects of the crisis well, the emotional wounds needed professional care. Beatrice's betrayal had left deep scars on his ability to trust, and the revelations about his father's past had reopened unresolved issues from his childhood. "You deserve to be happy, my friend," Paul said sincerely, "and you don't have to carry the world on your shoulders alone." After the meeting, Robert drove to Port Isaac to see his mother. Mrs. Clara now divided her time between the mansion in Seacrest Bay and a comfortable flat near the Roots project. Little by little, she was moving more of her belongings to her new home, preparing for the final move. He found her at the community centre, surrounded by children learning to do traditional embroidery. At 68, with completely white hair and a body weakened by arthritis, Mrs. Clara radiated a vitality that surprised everyone. "Son," she exclaimed upon seeing him, "you've arrived just in time. We're finishing the welcome banner for the inauguration." The children looked curiously at the elegant man in a suit, who many only knew from photos in local newspapers. Robert greeted them with genuine interest, learning their names and admiring their work. "Children, this is my son Robert," Mrs. Clara introduced him with evident pride. "He's the one who made all of this possible." "The credit all goes to my mother," Robert corrected. "She always taught me never to forget where we came from." After the class, mother and son walked slowly through the revitalized neighborhood. Simple but dignified houses replaced the old shacks, paved streets eased access, and small local businesses flourished. "We received a letter today," Mrs. Clara commented, as they rested on a bench in the newly built square. "From Beatrice." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. After the initial exchange of letters 3 months ago, there had been no further contact. "And what did she say?" "She's in Portugal, undergoing intensive treatment at a specialized clinic. She wrote to thank me for my reply to that first letter and to tell me about her progress." Mrs. Clara watched 2 children playing in the new playground. She said she still has a long way to go, but she can finally look at her actions with clarity and take responsibility for them. "Do you believe her?" "I believe people can change when they truly want to, son. It's not my place to judge her sincerity." Mrs. Clara took Robert's hand in hers. "Do you know what moved me most in the letter?" She said the biggest lesson she learned from all this was that no professional success or social status is worth the price of one's own humanity. That she realized how empty she was inside, compensating with control and power. Robert nodded thoughtfully. "It's a lesson many of us need to learn one way or another." As they returned to the community centre, they ran into Judith Sanders, the former Vance family maid, who had bravely warned Robert about Beatrice's true character. After the events, Robert had offered her a position in the administration of the Roots project. "Mrs. Clara, Mr. Miller," Judith greeted them with a smile. "Everything is ready for the big day. The community is buzzing with excitement for the inauguration." "And Regina, how is she?" asked Mrs. Clara. "Getting better slowly. Therapy is helping, and being away from her daughter while she gets treatment has been beneficial. They both needed that space." Judith adjusted the community coordinator badge she wore with pride. "She's confirmed her attendance for Sunday's event. It will be the first time she has appeared publicly since everything happened." The decision to invite Regina Vance to the project's inauguration had been Mrs. Clara's. "We can't let past mistakes determine our future," she had explained to her son. "Our families are linked by an old tragedy. Perhaps it's time to create a new connection, based on healing and reconciliation." As evening fell, on their way back to Seacrest Bay, Robert felt strangely light. The storm that had nearly destroyed everything he loved had, paradoxically, cleared the air. For the first time in years, he was breathing without the weight of expectations, from others and from himself. "What are you thinking about, son?" Mrs. Clara asked, noticing his contemplative silence. "About life, Mum. How it surprises us. 6 months ago, I considered myself at my peak, engaged to the perfect woman, president of a successful company, respected in the community. And then, in a matter of days, it all fell apart." He looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set over the sea. "But now I realize that life had fragile foundations. It was an imposing structure built on quicksand. And now? Now we're rebuilding on solid rock, with truth, integrity, real purpose." He smiled at his mother. "Without you, I would have been lost in that storm." Mrs. Clara affectionately squeezed her son's hand. "You've always had your own internal compass, Robert. You just needed to learn to trust it again." On Sunday, the day dawned a perfect blue for the inauguration of the Roots project. Hundreds of people gathered at the community centre. Local residents, authorities, the press, employees of Miller Construction and their families. Robert had planned a formal speech, written and rewritten dozens of times. But as he stood on the small makeshift stage, looking out at the diverse crowd that represented a new beginning, he decided to speak from the heart. "This project didn't begin a few months ago when we officially announced its creation," he said, tucking the sheets of paper into his pocket. "It began more than 30 years ago when a young widow with a small son decided to fight for a better future, against all odds." His eyes sought out Mrs. Clara in the front row, where she sat beside Regina Vance, two women united by stories of pain and resilience. "My mother, Clara Miller, taught me that true success is not measured by material achievements, but by the positive impact we have on the lives of others. For years I lost sight of that fundamental lesson, seduced by superficial definitions of success." He paused, letting genuine emotion show in his voice. "This project isn't just about building physical structures, houses, schools, community centers. It's about rebuilding the social fabric that unites us as human beings. It's about honoring our roots while cultivating new beginnings." At the end of the event, while talking with residents and authorities, Robert noticed a familiar presence approaching. Camilla, now not only his director of social projects, but a friend he trusted completely. "Moving speech, boss," she commented with a smile. "Almost made me cry, and I'm not an easy crier." Robert laughed, feeling comfortable with the natural ease that had developed between them in recent weeks. "I decided to follow my mother's advice, speak from the heart, not from the script." It worked. She looked around, admiring. The celebrating community. "You know, when you promoted me, I thought it was just gratitude for my work during the crisis. But now I see it was something more. You really believe in this transformation, don't you?" "I do. And not just for the company or for these families, but for myself too." Their eyes met for a moment longer than usual. There were no expectations, no pressure, just a genuine connection based on mutual respect and shared values. It was too soon to name what was emerging between them, but there was time. The future opened up, like a sunlit road after the storm. The next morning, the Cornwall Chronicle published an extensive report on the project, with the headline, "Roots and Wings: How a Personal Crisis Transformed into a Social Revolution." The article highlighted not only the physical aspects of the project, but primarily the philosophy behind it, the idea that companies could and should be agents of positive social change. In the small flat in Port Isaac, Mrs. Clara carefully cut out the report for her new scrapbook. Next to old black and white photos, a young her with Francis and little Robert, there were now colourful images of a new phase, a circle closing and simultaneously opening to new possibilities. At the Miller Construction office, Robert started the week with a different kind of meeting. Not with executives or investors, but with a group of young, newly graduated architects from the local university. The company's new mentorship program sought talent that combined technical excellence with social sensitivity. "You are entering the market at a time of transformation," he explained to the young professionals. "It's no longer enough to build impressive buildings. We need to build communities, not just erect structures, but empower people." As he spoke, Robert realized he had finally found his true purpose. The storm that had nearly destroyed him had ended up washing away layers of illusions and artificial expectations, revealing the core of who he really was and what truly mattered. Beatrice's betrayal, the corporate conspiracy, the revelations about the past, all of it had been painful, but necessary for his evolution. As his mother would say, quoting that old saying, "Storms clear the air." At the end of the day, Robert drove to the beach. He parked the car and walked barefoot on the sand, feeling the gentle autumn breeze. The sea was calm, almost flat, reflecting the sky that was slowly turning orange and pink. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Camilla. "Meeting confirmed with the Seacrest Bay Council to expand the project. Want me to come along tomorrow?" He smiled, typing his reply. "Of course. We're a team, aren't we?" Putting his phone away, Robert breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the salty sea air. One chapter was ending, another beginning. Life, like the ocean before him, was in constant motion, sometimes stormy, sometimes serene, always flowing, always renewing itself. And he had finally learned how to navigate its waters. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert and Mrs. Clara has touched your hearts. The journey of discovery, betrayal, and redemption we've followed shows us that even in the darkest hours, integrity and family love can light our way. To continue experiencing emotions like these, we have a special playlist with other British narratives that will make you laugh, cry, and reflect on life. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with others who appreciate a good story of overcoming adversity. In the comments, tell us, have you ever experienced a situation where you had to choose between forgiveness and resentment? We're eager to hear a little of your story too.